The walls of Jericho rose like a fortress of stone, imposing, solid, and seemingly impenetrable. From a distance, the city appeared unreachable, safeguarded by its massive fortification. But behind those walls, life pulsed through narrow alleys, noisy markets, and shadows that hid more than the eyes could perceive. Among those shadows lived a woman. Her name was Rahab. No one knew exactly when she was born, but her story began in a house built upon the very walls of the city. High above, the wind blew fiercely, carrying with it the murmurs of travelers passing through Jericho. Foreigners bearing news, rumors of distant lands, echoes of battles, and tales of unknown gods. It was through these whispers that Rahab began to hear about a mysterious people crossing the desert, guided by something no one could fully understand. Rahab was not an ordinary woman. She survived on the margins, selling her body to stay alive. Perhaps she once had a family. Brothers, parents, someone who once offered her shelter. But in the city of the powerful, someone like her was nothing more than a shadow, a name whispered in secrecy. Yet Rahab listened. She heard merchants speak of a sea that had parted before the Hebrews, of entire nations that had fallen before an invisible God. And word spread, they were coming. Jericho shut itself tight. The gates were locked. Warriors strengthened the defenses. Priests sought refuge in their stone idols. But Rahab sensed that none of it would be enough. Something deep within her whispered that this God, the one no one could see, was different. Then one silent night, two men knocked at her door. They were neither merchants nor soldiers. Their eyes did not seek pleasure or rest. They were searching for something greater. And Rahab felt that the choice she made that night would forever change the course of her life. Rahab was not naive. She knew well the kind of men who came and went from her house. She could tell apart a soldier in disguise, a deceitful trader, or a desperate traveler. But these two were different. They carried no goods, showed none of the restlessness of wanderers, nor the arrogance of Jericho's warriors. They were calm, observant, and focused, as if they already knew exactly what they were looking for. She recognized them before they even spoke a word. They were Hebrews. Rahab's heart began to race. Since childhood, she had heard stories about nations that rose and fell, armies that marched, and kings who crumbled. But nothing compared to the tales about this desert people. They said they had no king, but obeyed directly a God no one could see. A God without images or temples of stone, yet one who spoke to them, walked with them, and fought for them. Rahab already knew that name. These were not mere rumors. Egypt, the greatest empire on earth, had not been able to stand against him. Mighty kings had tried to resist and were erased from the map. Even the Amorites, neighbors of Jericho, had been destroyed without their gods being able to save them. And now that same people stood at the city gates, and two of their men were before her. Rahab watched them for a few moments. Anyone else would have called the guards. It would have been the logical thing to do. The entire city was on alert. Soldiers patrolled every street, ready to crush any threat. But Rahab stood firm. Deep inside, a voice told her these men were not enemies. Outside, the sound of boots echoed on the stones. Someone had seen them enter. The news would spread within minutes. Time was short. Without hesitation, Rahab made her decision. She moved quickly. Her feet slid across the wooden floor as her hands grabbed the strangers by the arms, guiding them silently up the stairs. On the rooftop lay heaps of dry flax and heavy fabrics, waiting to be worked on later. Without explanation, she pushed them under the fibers, hiding them among the stalks. Down below, the footsteps drew nearer, firm, heavy, determined. The guards pounded on the door. Rahab took a deep breath, adjusted her dress, masked her expression, and opened it. "Where are the men who came in here?" demanded the soldier harshly. Rahab blinked, feigning surprise. "Men? Oh yes, they were here, but they've already left. I believe they went out before the city gate was closed. If you hurry, you might still catch them." The guard didn't suspect a thing. He nodded and the others rushed off toward the gate. Rahab waited until the sound of their boots faded down the corridor. Then she closed the door, exhaled deeply, and climbed the stairs again. The spies were still there, motionless under the flax, waiting for her signal. She pulled the fabrics aside, and their eyes met hers, sharp, cautious, and alert. "I know who you are," Rahab said, folding her arms. "I know where you come from, and I know that your God has already given this land into your hands. Everyone in Jericho is paralyzed with fear. We've heard what happened in Egypt. We've learned of the kings who fell before you. There is no one in this city who does not fear the God of Israel." The spies exchanged glances. Silence. Rahab faced them with determination. "I spared your lives. Now promise me you will protect mine." The men looked at each other again. There was astonishment on their faces, but also a silent understanding. They knew that this woman had risked everything. If she were discovered, her death would be certain and cruel. Rahab leaned closer, speaking in a low voice. "Swear by the Lord your God that you will not let my family perish when Jericho is destroyed." The conviction in her words made the men tremble. One of them stepped forward and said, "Our lives for yours, as long as you don't betray us. When the Lord gives us this land, we will spare you and all who belong to you." Rahab felt the air grow heavy around her. Outside, the city still rested, but she knew that calm was only an illusion. Fear was already spreading through the alleys, the palace corridors, and the hearts of the warriors. Jericho was doomed. The spies needed to leave before dawn, before the soldiers returned. Rahab led them to the window. Below, the silence of the night stretched like a shroud. The wall was high, but there was a way out. She took a rope made of braided linen and tied it firmly to the edge of the window. The faint torchlight from the streets cast dancing shadows as the men grasped the rope and began to descend. Rahab's heart pounded wildly. When the first reached the ground, the second followed quickly. Before leaving, one of them looked up and said, "Stay inside your house. Tie a scarlet cord to this same window. When we return, that will be the sign. Everyone under your roof will be spared." A strong wind blew, tossing her hair. The shadows of the spies vanished into the darkness. Rahab slowly stepped back from the window, her eyes fixed on the rope still swaying in the wind. She didn't know how much time remained, but she was certain Jericho was living its final moments. Rahab stayed there, watching the rope move in the night. The silence was thick, but within her, everything cried out. She had made her choice. Now, all that remained was to wait. Her fingers slid along the linen until they touched the red cord, the same one she would use as a sign when the time came. She gripped it tightly, feeling its roughness against her skin. To many, it was just a simple piece of cloth, but to her, it represented the fragile line between life and death. The days dragged slowly, cutting through time like a blade. The entire city was on alert. Men marched through the streets, reinforcing defenses, sharpening blades, storing provisions. Everyone knew the Hebrews were near, but no one dared to speak of it aloud. Fear was a poison running through the veins of Jericho's people, and Rahab saw in their eyes the same terror that burned within her. Her heart raced with every sunset. They were coming. It was only a matter of time. Then, in the distance, a cloud of dust rose on the horizon. The army of Israel had arrived, but not in the way Jericho's warriors expected. There were no war machines, no sudden attacks, only firm, steady footsteps. The soldiers of Israel circled the city once each day. They only marched, no shouting, no arrows, just the dry sound of sandals on the ground and the echo of trumpets slicing through the wind. Rahab watched everything from her window. With each passing day, her breath grew shorter. The red cord was already tied. Her family, gathered inside the house, looked at her with unease, perhaps even fear. On the seventh day, everything changed. The sun rose blood-red, covering Jericho with an eerie light, as if the very air were charged with something unseen. Rahab felt it. Her brothers did too. Everyone in the house was restless, whispering prayers they had never spoken before. Outside, the Hebrews stood ready, but this time they would not march just once. Rahab ran to the window. The soldiers of Israel began to march one step after another, raising dust from the dry earth. One circuit, two, three. The people of the city watched in silence, tense faces, wide eyes. Some of Jericho's warriors no longer held their weapons firmly. Others exchanged nervous glances, realizing this siege was unlike any other. Fourth round, fifth, sixth. Rahab's heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. Her fingers clutched the window frame while the scarlet cord fluttered in the wind. They were on the final round. Then suddenly the Hebrews stopped. Silence fell upon the city like a thick shadow. For a brief moment, nothing moved. Not the wind, not even the warrior's breath. And then came the shout. A roar of thousands of voices tore through the air. The trumpets blared in unison, a wild, powerful sound, as if the heavens themselves were collapsing. The earth shook, the walls trembled. Rahab felt the ground vibrate beneath her feet, and then it happened. The stones gave way. First, fine cracks, then sharp cracks, and suddenly everything collapsed. Dust rose like a storm, blotting out the sun, muffling the screams of horror outside. The city once deemed invincible now lay in ruins before Rahab's eyes. But her house still stood. The smell of dust and debris filled her lungs. The air was thick and suffocating. Outside, cries of despair mingled with the metallic clang of swords slicing the wind. The mighty fortress, once thought indestructible, was now just a heap of rubble and anguish. But Rahab's house remained intact. She held the scarlet cord at the window. Her trembling fingers squeezed it tightly. It was her last connection to the promise she had received. Her family huddled in the corners, eyes wide in fear, waiting for the doors to burst open at any moment and for destruction to reach them, just as it had swept through the rest of the city. Then they heard firm, determined footsteps. They weren't Jericho's guards. It was them, the Hebrews. Rahab's blood ran cold for a moment. What if they had forgotten her? What if they didn't recognize her? The door creaked as it opened. Armed men entered, but they did not raise their swords. Rahab's eyes met theirs, and in that instant she understood. They had come for her. "Come with us now," one of them said, his voice steady, yet without threat. It was a summons, not a command. Rahab didn't hesitate. She grabbed her younger sister's hand, pulled her brothers and parents close. No one dared to look back. The path through the ruins was narrow, made of broken stones and lifeless bodies. Fire was already devouring parts of the city, consuming everything Jericho had once been. The air smelled of endings, but to Rahab, that moment did not mean the end. It meant a new beginning. The Hebrews led them silently out of the city. When they finally crossed the remains of the gate, Rahab realized she had left everything behind. Her house, her story, her former identity. Now she was just a foreigner among a people who had not yet accepted her. The sun burned fiercely over the camp of Israel. The desert stretched endlessly, an ocean of sand and stone that offered no shelter to those who did not belong. Rahab could feel the eyes upon her. Some were curious, others filled with distrust. Whispers drifted among the tents. The woman from Jericho, the foreigner, the prostitute. She didn't respond. She stood tall, head held high, though fear stirred within her. She had survived the fall of Jericho, but could she survive among those who saw her as an intruder? Days dragged on, and no one approached. The Hebrews were a peculiar people. Their laws kept them distant from anything they considered impure. Rahab understood. She came from a world of stone gods, from a culture where her worth was measured by what she could offer. But here, everything was different. They spoke of a God who not only demanded obedience, but also offered forgiveness. a God who looked beyond the past. Until one day a man looked at her differently, Salmon. He didn't avert his gaze like the others, nor judge her for what she had been. He saw what no one else could see. The woman who believed before she saw, who risked everything for a God she barely knew. Rahab didn't know how to react. She was used to eyes that demanded something, but his were different. And for the first time since leaving Jericho, she felt that maybe she didn't have to live as a stranger forever. As time passed, Rahab ceased to be merely the woman from Jericho. The whispers faded. Suspicious glances became rare, yet she knew she was still a foreigner among a people who, for generations, had learned to keep themselves apart. And there was Salmon. He didn't see her as a remnant of the past, nor as someone under constant trial. In his eyes, there was a calm strength, a kind of acceptance Rahab had never known. At first, she didn't understand. Perhaps it was kindness. Perhaps it was a reflection of the God of Israel, the one who had chosen her before she even knew his name. But it was more than that. With time, their encounters grew more frequent, their conversations longer. He listened, not only to what she said, but also to what she couldn't put into words. And, without realizing it, the distance between them began to fade. Rahab had never imagined finding a home there. She never thought that after everything, she would be chosen for something beyond mere survival. But Salmon chose her, not because he ignored her past, but because he saw what lay beyond it. And for the second time in her life, Rahab had to make a choice. This time, it wasn't about fleeing a collapsing city or hiding spies. It wasn't risking her life to stay alive. It was something simpler, yet far deeper, believing that she, too, could be loved. Their marriage took place, marking a new beginning. Rahab, the foreigner, the woman from Jericho, became the wife of a prince in Israel, and the future she had never dared to imagine was only beginning. Time passed, and Rahab was no longer seen as an outsider. Her name was no longer whispered in suspicion, nor her past remembered as an unerasable stain. Now she was part of Israel's own story. The days in the desert were over. The battles ceased, and the people finally settled in the Promised Land. It was there, among tents turned into cities, that Rahab built her new life. Beside Salmon, she gave birth to a son, a boy with calm eyes and a gentle smile. She named him Boaz. Rahab didn't know what the future held for him, but within her there was a certainty. God had already written the boy's path, just as he had guided hers, and she was not mistaken. Boaz grew up to become a man of generous spirit, someone who years later would open his home and heart to welcome another foreigner, Ruth the Moabite. From Boaz came Obed, from Obed came Jesse, and from Jesse was born David, the king after God's own heart. Rahab could never have imagined that her name would be inscribed in the genealogy of Israel's greatest king. She would never have dreamed that, centuries later, from her descendants the Messiah himself would come into the world. But God already knew. From the moment she welcomed the spies into her home, from the moment she tied the scarlet cord to the window, from the day she chose to believe before seeing, Rahab's name was preserved. Within the pages of Scripture, there she is, mentioned among the heroes of faith, those who trusted in the promise before it was fulfilled. Rahab's name transcended generations. Time tore down the walls of Jericho. Kings rose and fell, empires were born and vanished, yet her story endured. Not because she was flawless, nor because she came from noble origins, but because at a decisive moment she chose to believe. She could have clung to what she knew, the fragile security of a doomed city, but she dared to trust an invisible God. She could have been defined by her past, but she chose to build a new future. Rahab teaches us that it does not matter where we come from. What truly matters is where we choose to go. Looking at her journey, we understand that faith is not merely a beautiful feeling. It is action. It is taking a step into the darkness. It is trusting before understanding. It is obeying before seeing the outcome. She risked everything for a promise, for a simple scarlet cord fluttering in the wind, and that choice changed her destiny forever. And not only hers, her faith crossed the ages, shaping stories and influencing generations. The son she raised learned from her the value of generosity and hospitality. Her grandson became part of royalty, and centuries later, the savior of the world was born from her lineage. Perhaps Rahab never fully grasped the magnitude of her decision, but that does not matter. She did not act seeking recognition or glory. She simply trusted. And that trust was enough to transform a woman marked by the past into an eternal name among the heroes of faith. Her story still echoes in the hearts of those who believe it is too late, in those who carry scars and labels imposed by the world, in those who think they will never have a second chance. Rahab is proof that God does not choose as men choose. He sees the heart, and when he finds someone willing to trust, even without seeing the entire path, he changes destinies. If Rahab's story touched your heart, leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any content posted here. Together, let's discover the powerful and transformative lessons of God's Word. Click on the card that appears on your screen and watch our next video. God bless you.